Maisie, our scholarship case nanny, has a dark secret. She can cast curses. Whenever she gets hurt, the pain transfers directly to me. The first time, she took a knife for my husband, Adrian Sterling. I was the one who spent a month in agonizing pain. The second time, she was hit by a car while saving my in-laws. I collapsed at home, waking up unable to move my arms or legs. The third time, she tested some bad pills for my sister-in-law. My internal organs felt like they were being incinerated, and I bled from every orifice. When I finally dragged my rotting body to Adrian and begged him to send her away, he just sneered. He threw my medical report in my face. Stop faking it. Maisie has suffered so much for this family without a single complaint. You probably just starved yourself into a stomach ulcer and want to blame her. In the end, a freak electrical accident caused an explosion. Maisie threw herself in front of Adrian's family to protect them, and I watched my own body turn into a pile of ash in an instant. When I opened my eyes again, I was back on the day Maisie first entered our home. This time, I made her put down the kitchen knife. I called in 10 maids and 10 bodyguards to give her my full, undivided protection. Beads of blood were dripping from the edge of the knife in Maisie's hand. I stared intensely at my own palm. It was perfectly fine. Yet, the sharp, stinging sensation of skin being sliced felt terrifyingly real. It was exactly like my past life. The person bleeding wasn't me, but I felt every bit of the pain in the exact same spot. I'm so sorry, Maddie. I didn't know the knife was this sharp, Maisie stammered. She looked panicked, even dropping to her knees with a loud thud. But there wasn't a trace of actual pain on her face. It was as if she hadn't been cut at all. She raised her voice intentionally, her eyes darting toward the doorway. My husband, Adrian, came walking in with long strides. He glanced at the blood on Maisie's hand, and a flash of satisfaction crossed his eyes. Maisie's independence reminds me of my own college days, he said. I clenched my aching hand and spoke up suddenly. Adrian, my hand really hurts. He turned around, his brow furrowed in annoyance. Your hand is perfectly fine. Where is the wound? Don't tell me you're jealous of me talking to another woman again. Maisie is like a sister to me. I've looked out for her since we were kids. My sister-in-law, Sophie, poked her head out from the second floor to join the drama. Maddie, you've just stayed home too long. You try to compete with every woman you see. Adrian nodded in total agreement. Stop being so paranoid. If you keep this up, we're done. I felt a chill run through my entire body. The scene and the dialogue were identical to my previous life. I had brought Sophie here from her rural town, but she never worked a day in her life. She lived off me like a parasite, yet she showed no gratitude. Instead, she constantly tried to drive a wedge between Adrian and me. As for Adrian, after my father left the company to him on his deathbed, he had become increasingly arrogant. He saw himself as the king of the castle, and no one was allowed to challenge his authority. Ever since Maisie arrived, the pain had started transferring. No matter how deep the wound, Maisie never cried out. It was as if she had no nerves. I had told Adrian about my suspicions before. He had just stood by the bed and laughed coldly at me. It's bad enough you fake being sick, but now you're slandering someone who actually contributes to this family? She saved so many people in this house and never complains about the blood or the pain. If you pull this again, you can pack your bags and get out. Using the excuse of her being a lifesaver, he didn't just give her a luxury apartment the company developed. He used his connections to bring her family from the sticks to the city and gave them all jobs. He even paid a $100,000 dowry for her brother's wedding. On the day Maisie moved into her new place, Adrian and his parents threw her a housewarming party. The gifts they brought nearly emptied out our own house. Meanwhile, I was paralyzed in bed, wishing for death because of the immense pain. Adrian had dragged me up, his face red with rage. You think playing dead will let you dodge your responsibilities? Maisie is an outsider and she still risked her life for my parents. Where were you, the daughter-in-law? One more stunt and we're divorcing. You think I care about your family's pathetic company? I don't care about money. I just want a good wife and a happy home. In 6 months, I went to the ER 50 times. Every time Maisie got hurt, the pain hit me, making life a living hell. My medical records for painkillers were as thick as a dictionary, but Adrian just called it psychosomatic delusions. I was locked at home, watched by bodyguards 24 hours a day. There was no way to call for help. He even recorded my face when I was screaming in pain, and played it on the big screen during a board meeting. Everyone thought I was a drug addict who had lost her mind. Then came the explosion. Maisie heroically protected everyone while I was in the garden. I watched myself catch fire and burn to nothing in seconds. Right before I died, I saw Adrian and Maisie embracing by the fountain. His parents and Sophie were smiling, giving them their blessing. Maybe even the universe couldn't stand the injustice, because it gave me a second chance. This time, I'm going to find the truth. I'm going to make them pay in blood. Butler, I said, pressing the call button. Adrian frowned. What kind of tantrum are you throwing now? Bring 10 maids here to take care of Miss Maisie, I said. I looked directly at Maisie's face, which had gone stiff, and assigned 10 bodyguards to protect her around the clock. My voice echoed through the living room, leaving everyone stunned. The fruit knife in Maisie's hand hit the glass coffee table with a loud clatter. Sophie let out an exaggerated laugh. Maddie, did you lose your mind just because Adrian complimented Maisie? Or are you hitting menopause early? That's enough. Adrian snapped, grabbing my wrist. Are you insane? She's just a student. Why does she need a whole staff serving her? Maddie, besides spending my money, do you actually do anything? I pried his fingers off me and said coldly. Did you forget? The Sterling Group was given to you by my father. These bodyguards are being paid for with my own money. I pulled out the black card that only I possessed. Adrian's face turned an ugly shade of pale. I didn't care about his feelings. I stood up and accidentally bumped my knee against the table. A sharp, throbbing pain shot through me. As I let out a soft gasp, I kept my eyes glued to Maisie. She remained perfectly calm. There was confusion in her eyes, but not a single hint of pain. I was right. The pain transfer was a one-way street. She hurried over to help me up. Don't touch me, I said, slapping her hand away. Adrian's eyebrows shot up in a knot of frustration. I cut him off before he could speak. From now on, Maisie, you don't have to lift a finger. The maids and guards will handle everything. Maisie quickly grabbed the fruit bowl again, reaching for the knife. Maddie, I didn't mean to cut my hand earlier. Please don't kick me out. Give me another chance. I told you, I said, gently taking the knife from her. Go rest. Don't overthink it. You're like a sister to my husband, which makes you my sister too. You shouldn't be working in this house. Your family worked hard to send you to school. Now that you've made it out of that small town, you should focus on your studies. Adrian's expression softened visibly. He even looked at me with a bit of approval. Now that's more like it. Rising from a farm boy to the CEO of a listed company was his greatest pride. He pulled out his phone and went back to work. Maisie's fingertips turned white as she gripped her apron. She looked at Adrian with watery eyes. But it was a waste of effort. Adrian didn't even look up. In that man's eyes, nothing mattered more than his image as a perfect patriarch and a harmonious home. Late that night, I lay in my king-sized bed, reviewing everything. Maisie could only transfer pain to me, and it only happened when she was the one getting hurt. But why? How was this possible? Knowing 20 people were watching her to prevent any accidents made me feel a bit safer. Just as I was drifting off, a sharp pain stabbed through my temple. Ah! I screamed, rolling off the bed onto the floor. It felt like a power drill was boring into my skull. My vision went black. What the hell is wrong with you in the middle of the night? Adrian woke up, his voice dripping with annoyance. He only stopped complaining when he turned on the lamp and saw me twitching on the floor. What happened to you? A sharp pain shot through my fingers. Then a dull, repetitive ache hit my abdomen. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. Adrian continued impatiently. If you're going to keep acting like a freak, don't blame me for committing you to a psych ward. I forced myself to stand up. My legs were shaking so hard I could barely walk. I stumbled downstairs and kicked open Maisie's door. I caught a glimpse of a silver needle in her hand before it vanished. Right before I passed out, I saw her standing by the window with a smirk. Stupid girl. You really thought? The hospital reports came back clean. There was nothing physically wrong with me. Yet every bone in my body was screaming in agony. The doctors were baffled and could only give me high-dose painkillers. 3 days later, the moment I was discharged, I drove straight to a construction site. My men had Maisie pinned down under a crane. She was white as a sheet. How are you doing this? I hissed, grabbing her by the collar. She bit her lip, staring back at me with stubborn defiance. Maddie, I don't know what you're talking about. You can't do this to me. If Adrian finds out, he'll never forgive you. Is that so? I asked. Since she wanted to play the martyr, I decided to give her a real scare. I signaled my men to start the crane. Maybe we should see how you feel hanging from that. The steel cable began to lower. Maisie didn't panic. She just looked shocked. Are you crazy? I really don't know anything. You don't. I leaned in close. You're the reason I'm living in a nightmare of pain, and you expect me to believe that? Maisie, I'm asking you one last time. How are you doing this? I watched her face like a hawk, looking for any crack in her armor. Suddenly, her defiance melted away into a flood of tears. Maddie, I swear I don't know anything. Thud. She slammed her forehead hard against the concrete wall next to her. My head felt like it exploded. The pain was blinding. Before I could recover, someone grabbed me and delivered a stinging slap to my face. I stumbled back, dazed. Through the haze, I saw Maisie throwing herself into Adrian's arms, sobbing. Adrian, what did I do wrong? Maddie wants to kill me. Please. She was shaking like a leaf, looking like the victim of a lifetime. Save me. Adrian's eyes filled with pity for her. He looked at me with a cold, terrifying hatred. Without a word, he picked Maisie up and ordered his guards to throw me into the car. I curled up in the back seat, trembling from the pain. Back at the house, Adrian threw me onto the floor. His parents and Sophie came running at the noise. Maisie had a bloody forehead, clinging to Adrian like a wounded bird. And there I was, pathetic and disheveled on the floor. I didn't even have the strength to stand. Maddie Miller. Adrian roared. I've put up with your spoiled attitude, but kidnapping? You've gone too far. If I hadn't arrived, you would have murdered her. His parents looked at me in horror. Sophie added fuel to the fire. You're obsessed with my brother. You're so jealous you've lost your mind. Maisie sobbed heart-wrenchingly. I'm sorry, Maddie. I just look up to Adrian. I don't have any feelings for him. I didn't do anything. Please let me go. I worked so hard to get into college. My whole family is counting on me. I don't know anything about pain transferring. I really don't. She kept crying and began banging her head on the floor again. Each hit looked devastating. Thud, thud, thud. It felt like a sledgehammer was hitting my skull. I was on the verge of fainting. I wanted to tell her to stop, but I couldn't breathe. Adrian watched with pure disgust. Maisie has been banging her head for minutes and you haven't flinched. Clearly your pain transfer story is a total lie. Suddenly, Maisie bolted for the kitchen. She grabbed a bottle of bleach and tried to pour it down her throat. I'll prove my innocence with my life. Adrian snatched the bottle away. His face was grim. Maddie, how long are you going to keep up this act? He pulled out my hospital records and threw them at me. Look at this. Even the doctors say there's nothing wrong with you. He tenderly helped Maisie up. Then Adrian pulled out his phone and pointed the camera at me. I'm going to show the board members exactly who their heiress really is. A total psycho. Knowing what would happen if that video got out, I forced myself to crawl up. In my last life, that video was the reason 9 board members voted to kick me out. It led to a trending hashtag about me being a drug-addicted lunatic. It led to me being locked in an attic, praying for death. I wouldn't let history repeat itself. Adrian looked satisfied, looking down at me with a subtle sense of triumph. Done acting? Now go apologize to Maisie. I looked up slowly. Maisie was hiding behind Adrian, whimpering. She had a band-aid on her forehead. My in-laws stood by her side, looking at me with total disdain. Sophie just rolled her eyes. I want you to compensate Maisie, Adrian said. She's been bullied at school for being poor. You're going to donate a new lab building to her university. He said it like it was the most reasonable request in the world. I almost laughed. A whole lab building? He was already spending the inheritance my parents left me. I gripped the dining table, trying to stay upright. But before I could speak, the world started spinning, and I collapsed again. In the darkness, I heard Sophie's voice. Wow, she's really committing to the act this time. I woke up on the cold floor. The villa was silent. No one had called for an ambulance. I was in the exact same spot where I had fainted. I dragged myself up and called a private lab my father had secretly invested in years ago. 2 hours later, I was inside an MRI machine. Ms. Miller, your nerves are definitely showing abnormal stimulus responses, the lead doctor said, adjusting his glasses. There's no physical damage, but your pain is very real. He handed me a report. This data proves you've been in agonizing pain for a long time. It's as if someone is projecting pain signals onto you. I clutched the report and smiled coldly. Finally, scientific proof that I wasn't crazy. After getting an 4 for the pain, I walked out of the lab. Suddenly a sharp, intimate pain hit me. I froze, my face turning ghostly pale. I had felt this pain in my previous life too. But back then, so many things were happening that I didn't stop to think about what it was. Now I knew. Maisie and Adrian were together in bed. And all her discomfort was being dumped onto me. I clenched my fists so hard my nails drew blood. So that was it. Enduring the waves of pain, I called my best friend with trembling fingers. Set up a meeting with that specialist boyfriend of yours. Now, she agreed immediately. Over the next few days, I spent my time eating at 5-star restaurants and shopping. I acted like the carefree girl I was before I got married. My friend looked at me with nostalgia. Maddie, you're finally back to yourself. I smiled, but tears stung my eyes. Suddenly, I understood what Maisie hadn't finished saying that night. The day Maisie was supposed to take a knife, for Adrian was coming up. In my last life, she had insisted on a charity event to build good karma. It attracted a lot of high-profile businessmen. Then, a random attacker appeared. She heroically blocked the blade, winning everyone's praise. That day, I had been internal bleeding in a dark room alone. This time, I hired people to live-stream the entire charity event. On the screen, Maisie looked delicate next to Adrian, smiling sweetly. Suddenly, a man rushed out, swinging a knife at Adrian. Watch out! Maisie screamed, throwing herself forward. The blade sank into her abdomen. Blood sprayed everywhere. She let out a blood-curdling scream and hit the ground. But as the man lunged again, she suddenly shoved Adrian right into the path of the knife. It hurts. Save me. She curled into a ball, sobbing, before finally passing out. My phone rang. It was Adrian. His voice was shaking with fury. Maddie Miller, why did you try to kill Maisie? Adrian's voice over the phone wasn't just angry, it was trembling with the ragged, unhinged fury of a man whose authority had been challenged in public. Maddie Miller, do you think you're above the law? He screamed through the speaker, the background noise filled with the chaotic blare of ambulance sirens and shouting paramedics. The attacker was one of your company's former security guards. You hired him to stab her, didn't you? She's bleeding out on the stretcher, and it's all because of your pathetic, bitter jealousy. I sat back in the leather chair of my private limousine, swirling a glass of sparkling water, watching the live view on my tablet. Adrian, I said, keeping my voice as smooth as polished ice. Before you ruin your reputation with slander, I suggest you open Twitter. What the hell are you talking about? Or better yet, ask the reporters standing outside your hospital room. I continued coldly. Because the charity event was live-streamed by 4 separate, independent media outlets. Over 3 million people saw what happened. There was a sudden, sharp pause on the line. What did they see, Adrian? I murmured, leaning closer to the microphone. They saw your sweet, self-sacrificing nanny scream, throw herself in front of a blade, and then, the moment the steel bit into her flesh, panic, shove you directly into the attacker's second strike, and try to use your body as a human shield. Silence fell over the call. In the background, I heard the faint, muffled voices of hospital staff and journalists calling out. Mr. Sterling, is it true Miss Maisie used you as a shield after the initial hit? Mr. Sterling, what is your relationship with the nanny? You edited the footage. Adrian stammered, his bravado instantly evaporating into a desperate, hollow stutter. She was in pain. She panicked. Pain. I let out a low, mocking laugh. Adrian, check your own shoulder. The knife grazed your arm when she shoved you. Does it hurt? Of course it hurts. It's a knife wound. Funny, I said softly, my voice dropping an octave. Because while you were bleeding in the back of an ambulance, Maisie was screaming in the stretcher beside you. And yet I didn't feel a single scratch. I hung up before he could respond. I looked down at my hands. My palms were steady. My chest was calm. For the first time since my rebirth, a major injury had occurred to Maisie. A deep visceral stab wound to her abdomen. And I hadn't felt an ounce of pain. Why? Because during the live stream, when the blade struck her, Maisie hadn't just felt the physical bite. She had panicked. She had broken her own psychological focus when she shoved Adrian. The curse required 2 things to operate. Maisie's absolute emotional detachment from her own injury, and her target's total ignorance of the tether. The moment she felt real fear, the moment she tried to save her own skin by sacrificing Adrian, the tether had fractured. I tapped my tablet screen and called Julian, my best friend's boyfriend, a brilliant specialist in neurosomatic disorders and esoteric bioregulative research. Maddie, Julian's calm voice came through. I reviewed the neurological data from your MRI and the blood work panel we ran yesterday. We found something in your system. My grip on the tablet tightened. What is it? A high-frequency synthetic peptide combined with an active organic pathogen. Julian explained, his tone deadly serious. It's a rare, military-grade, parasitical nerve-linking compound. It was originally developed in Eastern Europe for interrogation suppression. It doesn't work through magic, Maddie. Works through heavy biochemical conditioning. My blood ran cold. Biochemical? Yes, Julian said. Someone has been dosing your food or water with a microtoxin that binds your central nervous system's pain receptors to a secondary transmitter. For the link to work, the secondary person, Maisie, has to be taking the corresponding master compound. And when she gets hurt, her master compound releases a massive localized signal, Julian finished. Your brain receives the shockwave, interpreting it as your own physical trauma. It's a chemical curse. And whoever gave it to her had access to your house, your food, and your personal medical care. I closed my eyes as a wave of realization crashed over me. It wasn't magic. It was poison. And the person who had managed the estate's kitchen and medical supplies for the past 3 years, the person who had personally ordered my daily vitamin supplements after my father died, was my husband, Adrian Sterling. An hour later, I arrived at the Sterling Villa with a team of independent forensic technicians and 2 plainclothes officers from the Commercial Fraud and Personal Endangerment Division. The house was empty. Adrian's parents were at the hospital fussing over their precious CEO, and Sophie was out shopping with my stolen credit cards. Search the kitchen, I instructed the lead technician, specifically the imported tea canisters and the daily vitamin dispensers in the master suite. While the team worked downstairs, I walked into the basement storage room, a cold, damp area under the pantry that Adrian had locked 2 years ago, claiming it was for archival tax documents. Using a heavy brass crowbar from the garage, I smashed the lock open. The door swung inward with a groaning screech. Inside, the room smelled of damp concrete, metallic copper, and sour herbs. The center of a small wooden table sat a cold storage medical chest, surrounded by several empty glass vials labeled in Cyrillic script. Beside the chest lay an old leather-bound journal. I stepped forward, pulling on a pair of latex gloves, and opened the journal. The handwriting belonged to Adrian. October 14th. The first trial batch was successful. Maddie's father is gone. The company shares are officially under my management, but the board still requires her signature for capital liquidation. If she dies too soon, her father's trust reverts to the charity board. November 2nd. Maisie agreed to the arrangement. Her family's debts in the province are cleared. She will take the master compound weekly. As long as Maddie is kept in a state of severe, unexplained physical agony, her mental competence can be legally challenged. The board will vote to declare her incapacitated by spring. January 12th. Maddie tried to go to the hospital today. I confiscated her records and replaced her painkillers with sugar pills. The pain signals from Maisie's minor cuts are working perfectly. Maddie looks like a ghost. Soon I won't even need to poison her directly. Her own brain will shut her heart down. I stood in the dim light of the basement, reading page after page of cold, calculated murder. There was no fate. There was no mystical curse. There was only a greedy, pathetic man who had married me for my father's wealth, hired a desperate, ruthless girl from his hometown to act as his biological proxy, and systematically tortured me to steal an empire. In my previous life, I had died believing the universe itself hated me. I had burned to ash in the garden, thinking I was doomed by a dark force I couldn't fight. A cold, terrible laugh escaped my lips, a sound so filled with venom that the technician standing at the door flinched. "Ms. Miller?" the officer asked nervously, looking at the journal in my hands. "Is that evidence?" "It's an execution sentence," I whispered, snapping the book shut. I turned to the forensic lead. "Sample everything in this cooler. Package the vials, the logs, and the syringes. I want a full toxicological match against the blood samples we took from me at the private lab." "Understood, Ms. Miller. What about Mr. Sterling?" I pulled out my phone and looked at the screen. Adrian had sent 12 frantic text messages over the last 10 minutes. "Maddie, where are you? Maisie's surgery just finished. The doctors said her internal bleeding is severe. You need to get down here right now. The press is everywhere, and they're asking questions about your father's estate. Come to the hospital, or I swear to God I'll file for emergency mental conservatorship. Tomorrow morning." I smiled. A slow, brilliant, lethal smile. I typed back a single line. "I'm on my way, darling. I'm bringing your favorite things. The VIP floor of St. Jude's private hospital was swarming with private security, guards and reporters when I stepped out of the elevator. Adrian was standing near the nurse's station, his right arm wrapped in a crisp white sling, his face pale and contorted with anger. Beside him stood his mother, weeping loudly into a handkerchief, while Sophie sat on a bench, scrolling through her phone, looking irritated. When Adrian saw me walking down the corridor, dressed in a flawless, tailored, emerald green suit, my hair styled, my posture immaculate, his eyes bugged out. "Maddie!" he yelled, marching toward me, his uninjured hand raised as if he wanted to slap me. "You finally decided to show up. Do you have any idea what you've done to this family's reputation today?" Two uniformed police officers stepped smoothly out from behind me, placing themselves directly in his path. Adrian froze, his eyes darting between the officers and me. "What is the meaning of this? Why are the police here?" "I brought them to help you, Adrian," I said smoothly, stopping 3 feet away. "You said someone tried to kill Maisie, didn't you? Well, the police found the masterminds." His mother stopped crying, looking up in confusion. "The masterminds? Did they catch the attacker's boss?" "They did," I replied, pulling a thick blue legal folder from my leather briefcase and holding it up for the surrounding reporters to see. 3 hours ago, state police executed a search warrant on the basement storage room at the Sterling Villa. I announced, my voice echoing clearly across the marble floor. They recovered 42 vials of a restricted, military-grade neurotoxin, along with a handwritten log detailing a 3-year conspiracy to systematically poison me, induce artificial neurological trauma, and falsify medical records to steal the Miller family trust. The reporters gasped. Camera flashes began exploding like a storm of lightning. Adrian's face drained of every single drop of color. He took a staggering step back, his hand trembling against his sling. That's a lie. You're framing me. That basement was locked. I don't know what you're talking about." "You don't." I opened the folder, revealing high-resolution photographs of his Handwritten journal pages alongside certified forensic handwriting analyses. Page 42. I read aloud, my tone flat and merciless. If Maddie dies too soon, her father's trust reverts to the charity board. Maisie will take the master compound weekly. Is this your handwriting, Adrian? Or perhaps you'd like the state crime lab to check the fingerprints on the medical cooler? Adrian stammered, looking around wildly. He turned to his mother. Mom, she's crazy. She's hallucinating again. Tell them she's insane. His mother opened her mouth, but before she could utter a word, the heavy double doors of the recovery room behind them burst open. A team of doctors and nurses rushed out, pushing a rolling crash cart. Code blue in room 402, a nurse screamed. Patient Maisie Lynn is in acute neurotoxic shock. Her vitals are plummeting. Adrian turned around in sheer panic. What? She was fine an hour ago. Julian stepped out from the recovery room, pulling off his surgical mask, his face stern and cold. He walked straight up to the police officers. The patient, Maisie Lynn, just experienced a severe biological backlash, Julian reported loudly, ensuring every camera recorded his words. When she suffered the abdominal injury during the charity event, her body attempted to trigger the neural transmission to Ms. Miller. But because Ms. Miller was administered a complete broad-spectrum peptide blocker at our lab 2 hours ago, the pain signals had nowhere to go. Julian turned his cold gaze onto Adrian. The entire neural shockwave rebounded straight back into Miss Lynn's central nervous system. Every single pain signal she has projected onto Maddie Miller. Over the past 3 years, every cut, every burn, every chemical spasm is currently hitting her brain all at once. A blood-curdling, guttural shriek tore through the doors of room 402. It wasn't a normal scream. It was the sound of a human being enduring 3 years of concentrated, compounded agony in a single instant. Ah, my head. My stomach. It's burning. Save me. Adrian, save me. The screams echoed off the sterile tiles of the hallway, terrifyingly raw, making several reporters instinctively take a step back. Sophie covered her ears, screaming in horror. Adrian's mother collapsed onto a chair, gasping for air. Adrian stood frozen, listening to the woman he had used as a weapon scream in the exact same voice, with the exact same words, that I had used when I lay dying in my previous life. He looked at me. I stood there, motionless, bathed in the flashing lights of the media cameras, looking down at him with an expression of complete, absolute indifference. Officer, I said softly to the lead detective beside me. Arrest him. Act 2. The fall of the House of Sterling. The news hit the financial world like an atomic bomb. Sterling Group CEO arrested. Charged with attempted murder, poisoning and corporate embezzlement. By 9 a.m. the following morning, the stock of the Sterling Group had dropped by 35%. The grand boardroom on the top floor of the Miller Tower, the building my father had constructed with 30 years of sweat and ambition, was packed to capacity. The 12 board members sat around the long mahogany table, their faces dark, tense and furious. At the head of the table sat Adrian's chair. It was empty. Beside it sat Sophie and her father, who had rushed to the office in a desperate attempt to maintain control of the company. Members of the board. Adrian's father shouted, slamming his hand onto the table. My son is the victim of a malicious smear campaign orchestrated by his hysterical wife. The police investigation is a misunderstanding. We still hold the controlling voting rights through the family trust. Do you? A cool voice echoed from the entrance. The heavy double doors swept open. I walked into the boardroom wearing a bespoke black silk suit, flanked by my legal team, Julian, and the senior forensic accountant from the State Financial Crimes Unit. The board members immediately stood up, several of them looking at me with deep respect and relief. Maddie. Sophie sneered, though her eyes were filled with nervous twitching. You have no right to be here. You sold your voting shares to Adrian when you got married. Correction, Sophie, my lead attorney said, stepping forward and laying a thick stack of court decrees onto the center of the table. Under state probate law, any asset transfer executed under the influence of systematic chemical administration or physical coercion is legally void ab initio. He turned to face the board members. As of 7 a.m. today, the state high court issued an emergency injunction, freezing all voting rights previously assigned to Adrian Sterling. Furthermore, a forensic audit of the company's accounts over the last 24 months revealed that Mr. Sterling embezzled over $14 million from the R&D fund. A wave of angry gasps erupted across the room. 14 million? An elderly director shouted, standing up and glaring at Adrian's father. Where did that money go? It went to buy 4 luxury properties in the capital registered under the name of Miss Maisie Lynn, the forensic auditor announced, projecting the bank statements onto the giant screen at the front of the room. along with a $100,000 wedding dowry for her brother, 3 sports cars, and an offshore shell account in the Cayman Islands. The screen lit up with crystal-clear transaction logs, property deeds, and signed wire transfers, all stamped with Adrian's private digital signature. Sophie's face went chalk white. She slid back into her chair, unable to utter a single word. In light of these disclosures, my attorney continued, Ms. Maddie Miller, as the sole rightful heir of the founder, is exercising her right to assume the role of interim chairwoman of the board, effective immediately. I walked up to the head of the table. I stood behind the executive chair, the chair Adrian had sat in for 3 years, while sneering at my pain, calling me a useless drug addict in front of these very men. I reached out, grabbed the leather backrest, and shoved the chair aside. Get a new chair, I instructed the assistant standing by the door. This one is dirty. The board members looked at me, then looked at the trembling figures of Adrian's family sitting across the room. One by one, the 12 directors stood up and bowed their heads slightly toward me. Welcome back, Chairwoman Miller, the senior director said firmly. I looked at Sophie and her father. As for you too, I said softly, security is waiting downstairs. Every asset, every credit card, every vehicle, and every piece of jewelry purchased using company funds over the last 3 years has been seized by the court. You have 20 minutes to vacate the Miller estate before the sheriff changes the locks. Maddie, you can't do this to us. Adrian's father wailed, dropping his pride, trying to reach across the table to grab my sleeve. We are your family. Adrian made a mistake, but we raised him to be a good husband. Have mercy, family. I stepped back, looking at him with pure, unadulterated disgust. When I was paralyzed in bed, screaming in pain from the poison your son gave me, where was your mercy? When your daughter called me a menopause-crazed lunatic while I was coughing up blood, where was your family? I signaled the 4 security guards standing at the door. Throw them out. While Adrian sat in a high-security holding cell awaiting his indictment, and his family was evicted onto the street, Maisie Lynn lay in the prison ward of St. Jude's Hospital under 24-hour police guard. The biological backlash had shattered her body. Because the chemical link had rebounded, her central nervous system was in a state of continuous hypersensory firing. Even the touch of a cotton bedsheet made her scream in agony. The doctors had to place her in a medically induced coma to prevent her brain from cooking itself from neuro-overload. On Thursday afternoon, I walked into her hospital room. The room smelled of heavy sedatives and ozone. Maisie lay on the bed, her face hollow, her skin sallow, hooked up to 3 different 4 drips and a heart monitor. When I stepped up to the side of her bed, her eyelids fluttered open. The moment she saw me, healthy, radiant, standing tall in my custom suit, a look of sheer, terrifying hatred flashed in her yellowed eyes. Maddie, she rasped, her voice sounding like dry leaves dragging across concrete. You ruined everything. I ruined everything? I pulled a chair over and sat down beside her bed, crossing my legs elegantly. Maisie, you took a job as a nanny in my house. My father had already paid your tuition. We gave your brother a scholarship. Why did you agree to help Adrian poison me? Maisie let out a wet, bitter laugh that ended in a harsh cough. Because you had everything, she spat, tears of pure venom spilling from her eyes. You were born with a silver spoon. You didn't have to work a day in your life. You had the wealth, the company, the status. And what did I have? A family that sold me for a dowry. She stared at me, her chest heaving. When Adrian came to my town, he told me he could make me rich. All I had to do was swallow a pill once a week and let him hurt me a little bit. He said you were weak, that you didn't deserve any of it. So you let him cut your hand with a knife, I said softly. You let yourself get hit by a car. You drank bleach. Also, I would suffer. And it felt amazing. Maisie shrieked softly, her fingers clawing at the hospital sheets. Every time I got hurt, I knew you were screaming somewhere in that big fancy house. I knew the rich heiress was crawling on the floor like a dog while I was getting a new apartment and designer bags. I was the one in control, not you. I listened to her pathetic, twisted logic. In her mind, she wasn't a criminal. She was a martyr who had traded her own body to usurp a life she felt entitled to. She had willingly turned herself into a bioweapon, blinded by envy, completely oblivious to the fact that Adrian was using her as a disposable tool. Do you want to know what Adrian told the prosecutor this morning? I asked, pulling a sheet of paper from my pocket. Maisie froze. Her yellowed eyes narrowed. What did he say? He signed a full confession, I said, reading from the legal transcript. I was manipulated by Maisie Lynn. She brought the Eastern European chemical compound into my house. She threatened to tell my wife about our affair if I didn't help her steal the company. I was acting under duress. Maisie's face went from pale to a hideous, ghost-like gray. No, no. He loved me. He said he would marry me once she died. He traded you to save his own skin, Maisie, I said, leaning closer to her face, every word dropping like a lead weight. Just like you traded your own body for a handful of stolen cash. You two were made for each other. Liar. You're a liar, she screamed, trying to reach out to scratch my face, but the leather restraints around her wrists snapped her back against the mattress. The heart monitor began to beep frantically. 140, 160, 180. I stood up, adjusting my jacket, looking down at her struggling, pathetic form, with complete, unbothered calm. The prosecutor is seeking 25 years for conspiracy to commit murder and biological endangerment, I told her quietly, and because the chemical compound in your system has permanently damaged your pain receptors, you will feel every single muscle spasm, every nerve ache, and every cold chill of that prison cell for the rest of your life. I turned my back on her. Enjoy your new life, Maisie, I whispered. It was bought with your own blood. Behind me, the sound of her screaming echoed through the sterile room, drowned out only by the frantic alarms of the heart monitor as the medical team rushed inside. Act 3, the final reckoning. 3 months later, the state maximum security penitentiary sat on a desolate limestone bluff 3 hours outside the city. The winter wind howled across the concrete courtyard, carrying flurries of dark, dirty snow. Inside the high-security visitation room, I sat behind a thick pane of bulletproof glass. The heavy iron door on the opposite side opened with a loud, metallic clang. A guard led a man inside. It was almost impossible to recognize Adrian Sterling, the sharp, handsome CEO who used to wear $10,000 Tom Ford suits and expensive cologne was gone. He wore an oversized, faded orange jumpsuit with inmate number 8849 stamped across the chest. His hair was shaved to the scalp, his face thin, sallow, and hollowed out. His uninjured left hand was bound to a heavy chain around his waist. When he looked through the glass and saw me, his entire body shuddered. He sat down heavily on the metal stool, his trembling hand slowly picking up the plastic telephone receiver. I picked up mine. Maddie, Adrian's voice rasped through the speaker. It was dry, cracked, and completely stripped of his former arrogance. Maddie, please. I didn't speak. I sat quietly, holding the receiver, watching him like an observer looking at a specimen in a jar. Maddie, you have to help me, he whimpered, tears instantly spilling from his bloodshot eyes, tracking down his hollow cheeks. My lawyer said. The state is seeking 30 years without parole. They're charging me with corporate grand larceny and attempted murder. He pressed his face against the cold glass, his voice pitching into a pathetic, groveling whine. I made a mistake, Maddie. I was confused. It was Maisie. She tricked me. She gave me those herbs. She told me it would just make you tired so you wouldn't argue with me about the company. I didn't know it was poison, Maddie. I swear to God I didn't know. I listened to his lies. How predictable. Even now, sitting in an orange jumpsuit surrounded by guards, his instinct was to blame a woman, to pretend he was an innocent victim of circumstance, to beg for the mercy he had denied me for 3 years. Do you remember what you told me 6 months ago, Adrian? I asked softly into the microphone. Adrian paused, his mouth hanging open, his tears freezing on his cheek. What do you mean? I dragged my body to your study, I said, my voice smooth, quiet, and echoing clearly through his earpiece. I was bleeding. I was in so much pain I couldn't stand up. I begged you to send Maisie away. I looked directly into his bloodshot eyes. And do you remember what you did? You threw my hospital records in my face. You told me I was faking it. You told me I was a drug-addicted lunatic who just wanted to ruin your happy home. Maddie, I was wrong. I was blind. He sobbed, slamming his cuffed hand against the glass, making the heavy acrylic rattle. I love you, Maddie. Eve. Always loved you. We can start over. I'll sign over everything. I'll give you back every single share. Just tell the prosecutor to drop the murder charge. Please. I can't survive in here. You love me. I let out a soft, breathy chuckle. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a small, laminated photograph. I pressed it against the glass for him to see. It was a photo of the Miller Tower at night. The giant neon sign at the top of the 60-story skyscraper had been completely renovated. The name Sterling Group had been stripped away, replaced by towering, brilliant white letters that lit up the entire city skyline. Miller Global Holdings. My father built that company, Adrian. I said every word clear, sharp, and weighted with absolute finality. You were just a temporary parasite that managed to crawl inside the walls while the doors were unlocked. Adrian stared at the photograph. His breath hitched, his chest heaving with shallow, panicked gasps. As for your trial, I continued, leaning closer to the glass, I personally donated $2 million to the State Victims Protection Fund today. The Attorney General assured me that your case will be prosecuted with the absolute maximum severity allowed by law. No, no. Maddie, please. Don't do this to me. Maddie, Adrian screamed through the microphone, his voice turning into a high-pitched, hysterical shriek. You told me once that you didn't care about money, I whispered, a cold, dark smile touching my lips. You said you just wanted a simple life. Well, Adrian, now you have 30 years in a concrete cell to enjoy it. I slowly lowered the telephone receiver, setting it neatly back on the hook. Maddie, Maddie, look at me. I'm your husband. Maddie, Adrian screamed, his fists beating wildly against the thick glass, dragging his waist chains across the metal counter as the two heavy-set guards stepped forward, grabbing his arms and forcing him to his knees on the cold floor. I stood up. I adjusted my dark wool coat, smoothed my gloves, turned my back on his screaming, thrashing form, and walked through the heavy iron security doors out into the bright, freezing sunshine. 6 months later, spring had arrived in the city. The cherry blossoms along the waterfront were in full bloom, casting a shower of soft pink petals across the sunlit plaza of the Miller Tower. The grand auditorium on the first floor was packed with hundreds of journalists, international investors, and business leaders. I stood at the central podium, wearing an immaculate white silk dress, holding a crystal trophy. On the screen behind me, the financial headline flashed across international news feeds. Miller Global recovers 100% market capitalization. Chairwoman Maddie Miller announces billion-dollar cancer research foundation. The crowd erupted into thunderous applause. Flashbulbs exploded like a constellation of stars. I looked out at the sea of smiling faces. Standing near the front row was Julian, holding a glass of champagne, offering me a quiet, proud nod. Beside him stood my legal team and the loyal directors, who had stood by my father's legacy. My body was completely, utterly whole. The phantom pain was gone. The toxin was purged. The dark, suffocating memories of the utility closet, the medical gaslighting, and the burning garden had dissolved into dust. When the press conference concluded, I walked out onto the high-floor balcony, overlooking the city. The afternoon breeze was warm, carrying the sweet scent of blooming jasmine and fresh sea salt. I leaned against the stone balustrade, looking out at the sprawling, bustling metropolis below. My phone buzzed in my clutch bag. It was a final administrative update from my legal team. Case finalized. Inmate Adrian Sterling was sentenced today to 32 years at state maximum security without eligibility for early parole. Inmate Maisie was sentenced to 24 years at the state medical penitentiary. All seized assets have been fully liquidated and returned to the Miller Foundation. Case file closed at. I read the message once. Then, with a single effortless motion of my thumb, I tapped delete. I closed the app, locked my phone, and slipped it into my pocket. I didn't need to look back at the dark anymore. The ghosts were buried. The monsters were caged. I took a long, deep breath of the fresh spring air, feeling the warmth of the golden afternoon sun illuminate my face, completely free, completely triumphant, and entirely whole.